Hello there, everybody, and welcome back to Buckeye Politics. It's me, your favorite Ohioan. So today we're going to be doing the 2022 governor's prediction as of today, June 20th, 2022. We're just a few months out. Not much is probably going to be changed from the last time we did this, but you know what? Let's get right into it. So the state Republican states include states of Idaho, Wyoming, South Dakota, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, Alabama, Iowa, Alaska, South Carolina. I'm iffy on Texas. Not really decided yet. Probably safe in Texas, just because polls show Greg Abbott leading Beto O'Rourke by about 10 to 12 points, and we have 10-point margin as the cutoff. So I do think in the governor race, Texas will be safe. The states of New Hampshire and Vermont, because of Phil Scott and Chris Sununu, both liberal Republicans up in the Northeast, who are very well liked there. They've won by huge margins. I see no reason they're going to lose. And with that, those are all the safe Republican states. Pretty self-explanatory. Not really much to explain there. The safe Democratic states include states of California, Hawaii, Colorado, Maryland, because Larry Hogan is term limited. Probably New York and Massachusetts. Massachusetts only because Charlie Baker, the Republican governor there, is retiring. And that's going to be it. These are all the safe Republican and safe Democratic states. Let's start filling in the likely states for each side. The likely Republican states include states of Ohio, Florida, Kansas, and I believe in Georgia. Those are the four safe. There's the four likely Republican states. And my great home state of Ohio. Really not much to say there. DeWine is very well liked among Democrats and moderates. Republicans not so much. As a matter of fact, the only reason it's not safe is because there is an independent candidate, Neil Peterson, who is running as a third-party independent, as like an America First conservative, to try to defeat DeWine and win the race. And he's actually polling very well. He's at around 10 to 15% already in the polls. And despite that, Nan Whaley, the Democrat nominee, is not very well liked. She's very far left, and so a lot of moderate Democrats are probably going to end up voting for DeWine. A lot of more conservative Republicans are probably going to end up voting for Neil Peterson. And so despite DeWine probably losing a lot of more conservative voters to Peterson, a lot of moderate Democrats and independents are probably going to vote for DeWine because he's kind of a more moderate guy, and Whaley is too far left. So in the end, I think DeWine still does win as of now, but I am interested to see if Neil Peterson possibly makes this race interesting. In the state of Kansas, incumbent Democrat Laura Kelly won by a very slim margin back in 2018. She's underwater. She's dead on arrival. The Republicans literally, if there's somebody with an R next to their name who is a half-decent candidate, they will win by a likely margin. Laura Kelly's not winning re-election. It's Kansas. The state of Georgia, Brian Kemp did win the Republican primary by a pretty big landslide, which tells me that I think that Brian Kemp is very well liked among the GOP base, despite all the stuff with the election and going against Trump. Stacey Abrams, against David Perdue, she might have a little bit of a chance, but not against Brian Kemp. Brian Kemp, as we've seen, is just too well liked both among moderates and Republicans, and I think even the David Perdue voters are still going to end up voting for Kemp in the end just to keep Abrams out of office. So Brian Kemp should have no problem defeating Stacey Abrams by about 5 to 6 points. Meanwhile, instead of Florida, Ron DeSantis, he'll probably win by 8 to 9 points if it's against Nikki Fried, who is the Democrat, the only Democrat agricultural commissioner. She's running. She's pretty far left, and she's just running a horrible campaign. And so if DeSantis is against her, he'll probably win by 8, 9, maybe 10 points. But if he's against Charlie Crist, who is the former governor of Florida, who's an independent, more moderate type, then he'll probably only win by 7 or 8 points. But still, he's going to win by 7, 8, 9, 10 points. Well, Florida's not going anywhere. The likely states for the Democrats include the states of Connecticut, Rhode Island, and that is actually going to be it. Both Connecticut and Rhode Island are usually relatively safe Democrat states, but I think just because in national environment, Rhode Island, whenever there's a red wave year, it always tends to move a little bit towards the right and be more competitive than people expect. Meanwhile, in Connecticut, Bob Stefanowski is the Republican who ran in 2018. 2018 was a big blue wave year, and Stefanowski, a Republican, made the race actually very competitive. He's a very moderate Republican, and he's well liked up there. And so he made the race interesting back in 2018. He's running again now in 2022, and in a red wave year, I think the state's going to be close. But Ned Lamont, the Democrat governor, is pretty popular up there, so I don't think so. I think Stefanowski will make it closer. It may actually go down to lean. I think it'll actually be lean, and I'll actually shift that right now. So I think Lamont will win, but the race is going to be very competitive. We'll fill in another lean state for the Democrats, and there's the state of Illinois. Illinois is probably going to lean to the Democrats. J.B. Pritzker, the incumbent Democrat, is not super popular. If you look at the state, inflation is hitting Illinois especially bad. The crime wave in Chicago, excuse me, has a lot of suburbanites turning against the Democratic Party. And I think if Richard Irvin is the nominee, he's the mayor of Aurora. He's a solid Republican. He's still decently conservative, but he's also moderate enough to do well in the suburbs and capitalize on Pritzker's failures. I think he can make the race very competitive. I don't think he's going to win as of now, but I do think the race will be very close. Let's see. The lean Republican states include the states of Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, and I think that's going to be it. Yeah. So the state of Nevada, Joe Lombardo, the Clark County Sheriff, he's the Republican nominee for governor against Steve Sisolak, the incumbent Democrat. Steve Sisolak had some iffy review. He did an iffy job handling COVID. He didn't do a great job. He didn't do a horrible job either. That kind of hurt him. And with Nevada trending heavily towards the GOP and Joe Lombardo proving that he can win in heavily Democratic areas like Clark County, and he is well liked there, I see no reason he can't flip the state. State of Arizona, Kari Lake. Hopefully, she's the Republican nominee. She's a lot more conservative than most people probably would prefer, at least on the right. I think she's fine, but a lot of people think she's too far right. But she should have no problem beating Katie Hobbs because Arizona is a relatively establishmentarian, moderate state. It obviously has some national populist tendencies, but there is still a decent amount of moderate Republicans there. And although Kari Lake is probably too far right for those people, there's no way they're going to be voting for Katie Hobbs. Katie Hobbs is a literal Bernie Sanders type. So I see no reason Arizona would not go to the GOP. In Wisconsin, Tony Evers, the incumbent Democrat, is pretty much dead on arrival. He has accomplished basically nothing and just LARPed on Twitter as this social justice warrior when he's done nothing for the state. He's not very well liked. Either Rebecca Kleefisch or Tim Michels, I think is his name, who's endorsed by Trump, should be able to beat him. I support Rebecca Kleefisch. I think she's the best chance we have against Tony Evers, although I think Tim Nichols will win that race anyways. But yeah, I like Rebecca Kleefisch is still my preferred candidate. She'll probably win by 4 to 5, while Tim Michels will probably win by 2 to 3. But either way, Tony Evers is going to lose. Now that leaves us to the tilt states. The tilt Republican states include the states of Oregon, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Maine. Ohio should be likely. My bad. In the state of Oregon, there's Christine Drazan is the Republican nominee for governor, and she's solid for the state of Oregon. She's conservative enough to still do well in the rural areas, but moderate enough to do decently in the suburban areas. And there's actually an independent running for governor in Oregon, who is splitting the vote between the Democrats and the the Democratic vote. Betsy Johnson is like this weird mix of this moderate and a Bernie Sanders type. Her policy is very weird, but she is running as an independent, and she's going to probably end up splitting the Democratic vote. And in a red wave year, with Christine Drazan being a solid Republican nominee and a good candidate, I think the state will flip to the GOP. Polls already show that the Democratic vote is being split, and Christine Drazan is leading by about 2 or 3 points from what I've seen. So this should not even become this race. Honestly, as long as Betsy Johnson doesn't drop out or she doesn't have a huge collapse in support, Oregon should actually flip to the Republican Party. Meanwhile, in the state of New Mexico, Mark Ronchetti, the news anchor and nominee for Senate back in 2020, who way overperformed Trump, he's actually a really great candidate for the state. He is actually leading the incumbent Democrat Michelle Lujan Graham, or whatever her name is, in the state of New Mexico. He's at the new recent polls after the primary have shown him having a very narrow lead over her. I expect that to continue. Mark Ronchetti, I think tilt to GOP is actually, as of now, an understatement. I think he could probably win by a lean margin. The incumbent Democrat Michelle Lujan Graham, she's very scandal plagued. She has some skeletons in the closet. There's some stuff. Some of her staffers have some sexual assault allegations against her and her staff, and she's not very well liked in the state. A lot of people just see her as this corrupt governor, which he kind of is. And so Mark Ronchetti, who's a great nominee against an unpopular Democrat in a favorable Republican environment, he should be able to flip this race to the GOP. Meanwhile, instead of Michigan, James Craig, who I think was our best shot at beating Gretchen Whitmer, did not get enough signatures to qualify to be on the ballot. So it looks like Tudor Dixon, who is a conservative political commentator and former manufacturer, it looks like she is going to be the Republican nominee against Gretchen Whitmer. And Tudor Dixon is actually really good on the issues. She was my second choice after James Craig. I think she's probably gonna beat Gretchen Whitmer by a very close margin. Whitmer, despite her crazy lockdowns and being very liberal on social issues, still has a decent amount of popularity among suburbanites and in inner city Detroit. And so with the big population center. So while she's hated across the state, and I think in a red wave year, as long as Tudor Dixon runs a decent campaign, I think she'll lose. The state is going to be much closer than people expect. Meanwhile, instead of Pennsylvania, Doug Mastriano. I used to not be a big fan of him. I used to support Lou Barletta, but I've looked more in depth at Doug Mastriano. He's a state senator from Pennsylvania, and he is the Republican nominee for governor. And I really like him now. At first, I thought he was like this far right guy who only talked about the election and had no chance of winning. Looked a little more into him. Looked a little more into his campaign, and I actually went to Pennsylvania, so I got to kind of see the energy. And there's a lot of energy. I saw a lot of signs for Doug Mastriano, and I looked into his campaign a little bit, and I like him a lot. I think he's going to be a great governor. And well, Josh Shapiro is a very well-known statewide, and he's a decent Democrat nominee. He LARPs the moderate. He's pretty far left actually, but he does a good job of portraying himself as this moderate kind of centrist guy. But I think once Doug Mastriano kind of exposes that, and once the campaign kind of kicks off even more, and Mastriano begins focusing on core issues, I think Shapiro is going to lose. Mastriano, like I said, he's a solid candidate for Pennsylvania, and in a Republican wave year, I think he should have no problem winning by about a point or so, probably a little less than a point. Instead of Maine, incumbent Democratic Governor Janet Mills in Maine, she's not well liked, but she's not hated either. She's kind of just eh. And then the former governor, actually, who I really like, this guy is an absolute Chad. He is going to be running. Paula Page is his name. He is running again. He's the former governor, and he was basically Trump before Trump. He was this like populist, America First type before Trump in the GOP before Trump even came around. He was a governor of Maine though, so not many people paid attention to him. But he is actually very good on the issues. He's a great candidate, and he's running a great campaign from what I've seen. And I think he will narrowly flip the state back from the Democrats, aka Janet Mills, because just simply put, it's going to be Maine is a Republican trending state. The incumbent Democrat isn't necessarily well liked there. She's not hated, but she's not liked either. She's just eh. And Paula Page is a very good Republican candidate. He's good on the issues, and he's very electable for the state of Maine. He's a perfect fit. So I think that he will narrowly win the state of Maine by about less than a point. This brings us to the final state, which is the state of Minnesota, and that is going to tilt to the Democratic Party. I think it's just a little too far gone with the shift we saw in Minneapolis in 2020. I mean, Black Lives Matter literally burned down the entire city of Minneapolis, and the suburbs and city itself still shifted heavily for Joe Biden, the Democrats. So I think Minnesota's too far gone. And while the Republicans have a decent nominee in Scott Jensen, he's not perfect, but he's not great either. He's like eh, and so I think he'll do a decent job at making the race competitive, and if there is a pro-weed party, because in the state, because there is a third party very popular in Minnesota, it's called like the pro-weed party, and they usually put up a candidate that splits the Democratic vote a little bit. But I think I've heard that they're not running a candidate because they don't want to split the vote. So if they don't run a candidate, I think it's probably tilt Democrat. But if they do run a candidate and split the Democratic vote just a little bit more, I think it's probably tilt Republican. Really just depends. I want to see a little more polling out of the race before I make an official judgment. But right now, after the shift we saw in Minneapolis and with the just everything going on, I don't think Minnesota is going to flip. So this is the 2022 prediction for the governor elections. I do hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please like and subscribe for more.